Hare Krishna. So welcome everybody for today's session. We'll start the session by paying our obeisances to His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya for International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Okay, so we are in our journey for chapter 13. And like we discussed in the last class, so we stepped into the last part, which was Gyan Yoga, section of Bhagavad Gita, which has the bottom 6 chapters. And we started with 13 chapters, which was named as the nature, enjoyer, and the consciousness. So last week we covered shloka number 1st to 12. Okay? And Arjuna asked 6 questions, right? The chapter starts with Arjuna asking 6 questions. So can I just, can any of you just tell what were those 6 questions about? Quite a lot of them are on the screen. What were those 6 questions?
Mataji, I remember a few kshetra, kshetranya, jnanam, gneyam.
Yeah, so 2 Ks, 2 Js, right? And then Prakriti and Purusha, which we will be doing today. All right. Thank you. Thank you. So we did, and we maybe we'll have a quick recap. So Arjuna asked 6 questions, right? We also mentioned that we can easily remember it by 2 Ks, 2 Js, and 2 Ps, right? And then, so he asks, what is Kshetra? What is Kshetrajna? What is Jnanam, Geyam, and Prakriti and Purusha? So we covered last time what is Kshetra. Kshetra is the field of activities. That is our body, right? Field of activities. And what was Kshetrajna?
Body Mataji. Kshetrajna is.
Kshetrajna is the knower of the body.
No,
right. And we learned that there can be 2 Kshetrajnas, right? One is the soul and the other one is the super soul, right? And we saw the difference between both as well. And then we learned what is Jnana, right? Krishna says the one who knows about the Kshetra and Kshetrajna is in Jnana, right? So the one who knows the body, which is the field of activities, and the knower of the field of activities, that is Jnana. And then today, I'm sorry, I'll correct this slide. So today we'll be covering from shloka 13 to 26, right? Now, today we'll be covering the other 3 questions, which is Geyam, Prakriti, and Purusha. Yeah, so these 3. Now, Geyam is nothing but object of knowledge, right? And from verse 13 to 19, it describes about Geyam. So, like we know that, Krishna has explained the first 3 questions there, and now we'll be covering these 3, right? And he begins starting to say, before he goes into Prakriti and Purusha, he starts explaining about, the object of knowledge, which is Geyam. Yeah. Okay. So this is the 13th verse. And it says, it is said by Krishna that I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. Right? So here Krishna is saying that he'll start explaining about whom? About the object of knowledge. That is the knowable. Yeah? Geyam, right? And knowing which will taste the eternal. In the Sanskrit verse of it, the word amrita is mentioned. That is nectar, right? That means nectar. So you will taste the nectar of what? Nectar of devotion. Once you know the person who is to be knowable, that's what Krishna is saying. Yeah. So once we taste that, then we will go back to Godhead. right? Once we understand that and once we taste that nectar, right? Now here, when Krishna is saying Brahman, the spirit, right? He's referring to the living entity, right? Now, last class we learned Brahman is a word which can be used in several contexts, right? There were 3 contexts it can be used. We learned Brahman can be used for the effulgence of Krishna. It can be used for a living entity, and it can be also used for, who is the controller of Prakriti and Purusha. Okay, so now Brahman here is referring to the living entity, right? So Brahman is the spirit, beginningless, is subordinate to me, Krishna is saying. This living entity is subordinate to me. And why is he calling the living entity as beginningless? Because, we say beginningless because nobody can trace, right? Nobody can trace when is the origin. When did the living entity come into existence? We have been undergoing millions of lives, right? So nobody can trace when did it start coming into existence. That's why Krishna is calling it as beginningless. Like we know, living entity itself is also eternal, right? So Krishna highlights here again that this living entity is subordinate, right? And actually, what is our, why are we here in this material world? Because of that, because of forgetting that lack of remembrance of us, that we are subordinate to Krishna. That's the reason we are here. We have forgotten that, our eternal relationship with Krishna, right? As servitor for Krishna. Right? So that is the key reason why we are in this material, right? So, so that's why Krishna is highlighting here that he's going to explain about the knowable, Gayam, which will take out all the, which will allow Arjuna to taste the, nectar. Yeah? Now, further moving, I think when it comes to the living entity, that is the soul, right? We learned in the 2nd chapter as well, some of the characteristics of the soul, like we learned in the prior one, right? It's beginningless, So we have already learned this Najayate Mriyate Nakadachi, that shloka, right? 2.20. That for the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time, right? He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being, right? He's unborn, eternal, ever existing, and renewable. He's not slain when the body is slain. And we saw a lot of examples when we went through this, right? That, like a body, when it is lying on the ground, say you come across with an accident and you're lying across on the ground, the body can be the same, but there's something missing, it's the soul, right? So we studied the difference last time also, the difference between, body and soul, the gross elements, subtle elements, and the soul, right? So the soul is eternal, yeah, it is unborn, right? So we know this, we have already discussed this. Now further moving, now actually in this verse, because Brahman refers to the soul and not to the super soul, Prabhupada has highlighted this in the purport, that the Supreme Lord as the super soul is also stated in Vedic literature to be Pradhana Kshetrajna Patir Gunesha, right? That means that the chief knower of the body and the master of 3 modes of material nature. This we know already, right? That he is super soul. We saw the difference between the soul and the super soul. The soul can know only of its own body, right? But the super soul knows about all the bodies across all the species, right? And the super soul, Krishna, is about the 3 modes of material nature, yeah. And because the material nature is under his guidance, right? Mayadakshena Prakriti, we learned that also. So the living entities are eternally in the service of the Supreme Lord. This is also confirmed by Lord Chaitanya in his teachings. Therefore, the description of Brahman mentioned in this verse is in relation to the individual soul. And when the Brahman is applied to the living entity, it is to be understood he is Vigyan Brahman, as opposed to Ananda Brahman. Ananda Brahma is the Supreme Brahman. That is the personality of God. Yeah. So Prabhupada is highlighting that the key thing here is that what we need to take away is Brahman in this verse refers to the living entity, the soul, not the super soul. Yeah. And see, living entity as souls, we can also come to the stage of this Ananda Brahma, right? When we are fully surrendered to Krishna, when we are back. Yeah. So we can also be in that Sachitananda, state like Krishna. Right? So with that, we'll move to the 14th verse, qualities of the super soul. Yeah. So maybe Jyoti Mataji, will you be able to read?
Yes, Mataji. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads, and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. Bhagavad Gita 13.14. Hare
Mm.
Krishna Mataji.
So see, in this, before this verse, Krishna spoke about, that he's going to talk about the knowable, the object of knowledge, right? So that's what we will see now in this verse onwards, 14 to 19, we'll see the, about the super soul, about the knowable, right? About Krishna overall. So qualities of super soul then. Here it's clearly stated that, everywhere you can see his hand, legs. We know that as super soul, Krishna is present in every atom, right? So he's everywhere. He's pervading everywhere, his energy. We have seen that, right? So now Krishna states about super soul, soul as the knowable. Yeah. Everywhere also indicates that, what does it indicate here when we see his hands, legs, eyes, head, faces? When these are mentioned, that means that Krishna is a person, right? It's not, it's not just a light. We can clearly see here that we are talking about the Supreme as a person, right? Because he has his eyes, head, ears, hands, legs, everything is mentioned, right? So how can we understand this? We can understand it with an example that just as sunshine is spread all over the universe, the energy of the Lord is spread all over the creation, and everything is resting in that energy, right? Just like we see the sunshine spread everywhere. Similarly, Krishna's energy, everything in this cosmic manifestation has Krishna's energy. Yeah, that's why it is into existence, right? So that's the quality of the super soul, that it pervades everywhere. That's what Krishna is highlighting here. And in the purport, Prabhupada has also mentioned that in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that if anyone offers him a flower, a fruit, or a little water, yeah, he accepts it, right? If the Lord is a far distance away, how can he accept things then? This is the omnipotency of the Lord. Even though he is situated in his abode, far, far away from earth, he can extend his hand to accept what anyone offers, right? Because he's present everywhere, right? It's like this is actually very inconceivable for us, right? To follow that Krishna, through his energy is everywhere, in every atom. And we also learned because of, that his different limbs can do the function of different things. Like when we were discussing on this shloka, particularly 9.26, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam, we also discussed that how Krishna accepts the food. He doesn't have to, only eat with his mouth. His eyes can perform the function of his mouth. He can eat, accept the offering, what we are doing through his eyes. When he can create this whole cosmic manifestation through just a glance of his, then do we think it is not possible for us? No, nothing is, right? So, so any limb of Krishna can do the function of, another limb of his. So that's why Prabhupada is highlighting here the omnipotency of the Lord. What is, so yeah. So with that, following with the same thing on these qualities of the super soul. So this is shloka of 15 shloka. So I think it is Hari Krishna Prabhuji. Is that with you with Reddy's?
Yes, Mataji.
Yeah. Will you be able to read this?
Yeah. Qualities of super soul. Sarvendriya guna bhasham, Sarvendriya vivarjitam, Asaktam, Sarva Bruschaiva, Nirnum, Gunabho Trutcha. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is master of all modes of material nature. Bhagavad Gita 13.15.
Thank you. So further on understanding the knowable, yeah. So what are the further qualities? That the super soul is the original source of all senses. Yet he is without senses, means he is without material senses. Yeah, everything is transcendental. Yeah? And that's what, when we see the nirgunam word, right? Nirgunam means not having material senses. Okay. So it does not mean that he doesn't have senses at all, right? So he is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings, right? See, he is we have learned this, right? But in the next shloka, we'll also see the whole thing as how Krishna is within and without. Means he's inside us and also outside, right? And he's the maintainer, we know. But at the same time, he's not attached. He's aloof, right? We saw this the contradicting verse in 9th chapter, right? Where he is the maintainer of everything, yet he is not really attached. Why? Because he's performing his pastime, in Goloka, right? But at the same time, through his energy, he's still pervading everywhere, right? So he's aloof of what is around, right? He's aloof of these things. So at the same time, it's highlighted that he transcends the mode of nature. At the same time, he's the master of the modes of material nature, right? So he's maintainer, but he's not attached. At the same time, the three modes of material nature is under his, so under him, right? At the same time, he's above, right? Only when we say that, that shloka of Mayadakshena Prakriti. So if this material nature is under him, and we always learn that, to surpass this material nature, we have to do bhakti, right? That's the way, right? Then how can we say that Krishna is under the modes of nature, right? If that is the solution to do bhakti of Krishna, to get rid of this material nature influence, then how can we say that Krishna is under the modes of material nature? Right? So he's definitely above the modes of material nature, right? That's why he is the solution for us. Now, it's like, these three modes of, it's the material nature, it's given the responsibility by Krishna, to perform certainly, and that's why it performs, right? So that's what this shloka, tells us, how he is in everything, but at that same time, he is not, and how, he's the master of modes of material nature, and he's nirguna, means he does not have any material gunas. Now, with that, again, from the purport, it's mentioned that the Supreme Lord's senses are not so covered. His senses are transcendental and are therefore called nirguna. That's what we discussed. Guna means the material modes, but his senses are without material covering. It should be understood that his senses are not exactly like ours, although he is source of all our sensory activities. He has his transcendental senses, which are uncontaminated. Right? We also, learned that shloka from Brahma Samhita, right? Ishwaraha Paramaha Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. So Brahmaji is saying that, the feature of Krishna is Satchitananda, right? Sat Chit Ananda, right? Sat, eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss, Ananda, right? So he specifies that. So that's what Prabhupada is again highlighting here, we have to be very clear with the words like terminologies like nirguna, that does not mean, that means that he does not have any material gunas. Yeah. And he is the source of all the senses. Right? That's why he's called Rishikesh, right? Because he's the Lord of all senses. So with that, we will move to 3 verses. And these verses, I think the gist of these verses, we have covered it in, the Bhakti Yoga section before. So it should be much straightforward now to understand these verses it was before, hopefully. So the first verse here, 16th verse, it states that the supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings. Yeah, outside, yeah. Inside in the form of super soul, like we know. And when we are talking, and moving and non-moving, right? Every atom Krishna is present. Not necessarily just the living entities, right? So every atom Krishna is present because he is subtle. He is beyond the power of material senses to see or to know, right? We have imperfect senses. We know that our senses are not perfect, right? We can't even see the small microorganisms, right? So with that level of senses, we cannot see Krishna. And we also saw how there has to be a special vision which has to be given by Krishna for us to see Krishna, right? Which we saw prior, yeah? That Divya Chakshu. So that's why he's beyond the power of material senses to see or to know, right? Although far, far away, he's also near to you. Yes, he's far, far away in his own abode, playing his pastime. At the same time, he's the closest to us as Super Soul. Yeah. So that's the meaning of the 16th verse. And then again, further characteristics of Super Soul. Although the Super Soul appears to be divided among all beings, he's never divided. He's situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops them. Right? He's the maintainer, he's the creator, and he's the destroyer. Right? He expands into different, right, to make these happen. At the same time, when we say that he appears to be divided among all beings, he's never divided. We can understand this with an example of, the sun, right? I think we discussed this example before, that the sun's reflection falls on, say, different pots. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that the sun is divided. Right? So that's the concept here we have to try to understand. So those super soul appears to be divided among all beings, but he is never divided. Okay, he is one. Krishna is one. He appears to be, of course, he is as a super soul in each one of us, but that doesn't mean that Krishna is dividing himself to be in each one of us. No, he is one. But like the reflection of the sun is falling in each pot, right? He is within all of us. That doesn't mean he has to split himself. Yeah. So that's the gist of this verse. Yeah? Now, the 18th verse says, he's the source of light in all luminous objects. He's beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He's the object of knowledge and he's the goal of knowledge. He's situated in everyone's heart. Now, this is very important for us to understand that when we say he's the source of light in all luminous objects. See, what is the source of light in this material world? The sun, right? Even the moon gets the light. The moonlight is what? Because of the sun, right? Now, where does the sun gets its light from? From the effulgence of Krishna. So, and in the spiritual world, if you remember in 8th chapter, we learned there was a verse, I don't remember the verse, but there was a verse, the translation was that in the spiritual world, you don't need any, there is no darkness. Krishna's body effulgence itself, is the light. But unlike in material world, where, of course, the sun is there, and that is because of Krishna's sun is getting its effulgence from Krishna, right? So, but we do have darkness because that's the material world, right? So So he is the source of light in all luminous objects. Yeah. He is beyond the darkness of matter. Yeah. Now this statement of he is knowledge, he is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. Okay. It's important for us to, understand that he is knowledge. Yeah. So once, see, we have learned what is Jnanam, right? What is Jnanam? Understanding the super soul, right? Now, that is, and then we are stepping up that he is the object of knowledge also, right? What is the object of knowledge? Krishna, right? So the process is Krishna, the object is Krishna. And what is the goal? Once we know that this is the object of knowledge, then we work towards that goal, right? The goal is to serve and to love Krishna. That is the goal, right? So every means will see, that the knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the goal of knowledge. He's everything. Okay. So in and out, it's very important for us to understand this as a kind of sutra for us, that not only that he's the object of knowledge, but he's our goal. That's where we want to go back to Godhead, right? And that would come with the service and with love, right? So that is inherent to us. It's very natural to us, the two things in us, which is very natural, is service and love. Any relationships we see, these two components will be there. Even to your family, what are we doing? Service, right? Without these two components, it won't work. Service and love. So the same thing, our goal should be to serve and to love Krishna. That's the goal. Okay. So now we'll come to the last verse of this particular section of object of knowledge. Yeah. So now Krishna in the end, while he's closing the knowable, that is the object of knowledge, Gyan, he says, what is the qualification to understand this object of knowledge? And the qualification is that one has to be a devotee to understand this. Okay, that's the qualification. So the shloka is like, iti kshetram tatha jnanam geyam choktam samasatah madbhakta etad vijnaya madbhavayo papadyate. So thus the field of activities, body, the knowledge, and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. Okay, so Krishna is giving the qualification, right? So far he has explained so many technical terms in this chapter since we started, right? Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnanam, Geyam, and so what he's saying is you will understand all this. The person who can understand only, only the person who is a devotee can understand this. Yeah. And thus he attains to my nature. What is Krishna's nature? Same thing, Sachitananda nature. Full of, bliss, eternal, full of knowledge and peace. Okay. So that's what Krishna is highlighting. Okay. So we'll conclude this section by something from the purport that Prabhupada mentions that thus three items have been described. The field of activity, which is the body, the process of understanding, and both the soul and the super soul. It is especially described here that only the unalloyed devotee of the Lord can understand these three items clearly. So for these devotees, Bhagavad Gita is fully useful because it is only through this medium we are able to understand this, right? Bhagavad Gita. Yeah? So it is they who can attain the supreme goal, the nature of the Lord, Krishna. In other words, only devotees and not others can understand Bhagavad Gita and derive the desired results. Okay, so Krishna is highlight again, that so far in this section. So just before we step into next, because it is so technical, I'm trying to revise it. So we learned Kshetra. Kshetra is the field of activities. Kshetrajna is the knower of the field, and it can be both soul, which knows only about self, but the other knower is super soul, who knows about all the bodies. Yeah, everything. Kshetra done, Kshetrajna, then comes Jnana. If the person who understands these two are in Jnana, knowledge. And then we learned about Geyam today, Yeah, Gayam is the object of knowledge, and Krishna gave many qualities about the object of knowledge. Yeah, that it can be, this object of knowledge is unattached at the same time everything. He's aloof. And at the same time he's the maintainer. Yeah, he's in everyone. He cannot be divided. So there were several characteristics which we learnt about the object of knowledge. Right, he pervades everywhere, but he's not divided. Right, and then in the end we learned only person who is a devotee can understand these, that Kshetra, Jnanam, and Geyam. Only a person, only a devotee can understand this. Okay, so far we have covered. And now we'll step into Prakriti Purusha. Yeah, the last two questions by Arjun. And now, see, it says Prakriti Purusha and their union. Okay, now what is union? Prakriti, as we know, straightforward, it's material nature. Right? Purusha will learn. It can be again like Kshetragni, it can be both. Purusha can be, Purusha basically means enjoyer. Okay. Now enjoyer can be soul, because soul originally is not. It's only the super soul who is the enjoyer. Like Bhoktaram Yagna Tapasam, right? Sarva Loka Maheshwar. Surudam Sarva Bhutanam Jnatva Mam Shantim Rachta. Krishna mentioned in 5th chapter only that one person who knows that I am the supreme proprietor, supreme well-wisher, supreme controller, that person will be in peace. He gave it up in 5th chapter itself. So now when we are talking about Purusha, but the soul wants to enjoy. Because of that enjoying tendency only we are here in this material. Right? We also wanted to enjoy. So Purusha can be, the soul, and of course it will be the super soul, who is the supreme enjoyer. Yeah, and their union. Now, union means that how Purusha came in contact with material nature. How did the soul come in contact with the nature? Okay, so that's the union. Okay, so now first shloka of this, maybe I'll. Kavya Mataji, will you be able to read?
Yes, Mataji. Prakriti and Purush are both eternal. Prakritim Purusham cha Vidya Anadi Bhav Api Vikram cha Gunam cha Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavan. Material nature and the living entity should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and modes of matter are acts of material nature. Bhagavad Gita 13.20.
Thank you. See, it is important for us to understand the concept here that material nature, Krishna is saying material nature and living entities are beginningless. Now we learned living entities are beginningless, right? We have covered that. Now material nature. See, when we started this Bhagavad Gita sessions, I think it was the first session where we covered, the 5 main topics of Bhagavad Gita. What are the 5 main topics of Bhagavad Gita? It was Prakriti, Jiva, Ishvara, Kala, and Karma. Okay. And when we are talking about Jiva and Ishvara, both of them can be together clubbed as Purusha. Okay. So, in short, to understand, Prakriti, Purusha, Kala, and Karma. These are the main subject topics of Bhagavad Gita. Okay. Now, out of these 5, there is only one which is temporary, not permanent. That is Karma. Okay. Prakriti, Jiva, Ishvara, and Kala. These are eternal. Only Karma is the factor which is temporary. Okay. So, here Krishna is highlighting again the same thing, that material nature is also beginningless. Yeah. No, material nature is eternal because why? Because see, we learned that this material nature, we learned like that in short that it gets manifested and unmanifested, right? So eternal in the sense that whether it manifests or unmanifests. The components of material nature will always be there. For example, say a building. Yeah, a building is constructed. It is manifested, that means, right? But when the building is broken down, which is unmanifested, you will still have the components of the building which you have made, the building material. So that is always going to be there. Yeah, it's just a matter of getting it manifested and unmanifested. So material nature is always there. It just manifests and unmanifests. But the components like earth, water, air, all these are always going to be there. These are eternal. And that's why we say, that because the components, even after unmanifestation, it's always be there. That's why it is called as eternal. Yeah. So only when you can say that the manifestation of the material nature is temporary, or the unmanifestation of the material nature is temporary, but the material nature itself is always eternal. Okay, so that's the difference. Yeah. So, and this material nature is actually the cause of these three modes, right? Mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And we'll learn this in Bhagavatam, in third canto, that how this whole thing, I think in short, we have always done it. It comes many times, that how Mahavishnu exhales, right? And the universes come out. That is in form of pradhana. It is called as pradhana. Pradhana is nothing but the unmanifested form of material nature. Okay. And this pradhana further then manifests into the three modes. And then we get all the elements come out, and senses, all these comes, and then with our karma, swabhava factors, then we all the the whole universe is manifested. Yeah. So and that's why Krishna is saying here, when he is saying material nature and living entity should be understood to be beginningless. I hope that makes sense now. Their transformations and modes of matter are products of material nature. We just learned, right? Modes of the matter are nothing but the transformation of material nature. Pradhana, it becomes ahankara. Ahankara becomes mode of goodness, passion, ignorance. So it's a transformation. Okay, like you see our body also, it undergoes transformation, right? Because it is made up of matter. Yeah, we undergo this birth, then growth, and then we stay at the same for some time, then we reproduce, then old age hits, then death. Yeah, you see transformations every time within the body, right? So transformation is because it is made up of matter. Okay, so the transformation and modes both are coming from material nature. Okay, and material nature actually gives us the matter, or form of the body by which the living entity can live their life in this cosmic manifestation. It's like based on our desire and our karma, we then are given a certain species of body, certain body to live that life. But our problem is that we get attached to that form of the body. It's just not us as humans attached to this, right? Even if you see a small animal, they are attached, right? So and sometimes it's because of our mind, because it experiences pain, pleasure, anxiety, we identify ourselves to this body. So that's the reason why we undergo the sufferings, because we think we are this body. Not so. That's the basic thing what is making us. Okay, so moving further, then we learned this before, that the body, it has soul. It is then the next layer is it is covered by subtle body, which is mind, intelligence, and ego, and then it covers by gross body, which is earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Yeah. Now, just to recap, body is the field of activity. It is the kshetra. Yeah. And the knowers of the body are both individual soul and super soul. That is kshetra. The body is the field of activity and is composed of material nature. We just learned. Yeah. The matter comes from material nature. Yeah? The individual soul that is embodied and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. Okay, this is how the Purusha comes in union. That's why the union is there mentioned. Yeah, it is the material nature which gives us a specific body, the matter, and the Purusha then has the enjoying tendency. And that's how it comes in contact. Yeah. Now, with that, yeah, just that it is to be understood that both the super soul and the individual entity are different manifestation of whom? Supreme Personality of God. All of us are different manifestations of. We are ultimately, Krishna says, "Aham bija pradapita" in 15th chapter. Yeah, he is the seed giving father. Right. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the super soul is in the category of his personal expression. Yeah. So Kshiro Dakshya Vishnu form, which is within us as super soul, it's an expansion of Krishna. Okay. Whereas we represent him. Okay. So we are living entity are also called as, tiny Purusha. As we have that enjoying mentality. Purusha means enjoyer. And because we have that enjoying mentality, we are also addressed as Purusha. We try to imitate Krishna. That is the main cause for our fall down to this material. Okay, because of our enjoying tendency. Okay, now we know this map, but just to recap that in 3rd chapter itself, because it's important for us to correlate. Krishna, it's not that he's saying this now itself. He has also said this before in the prior chapters, but because of our level of consciousness has become better, it has increased, it's more better for us to absorb this information. So in 3rd chapter, 10th verse, Krishna had already mentioned that, the only way, he gave this material platform for us so that we have a chance to, go back home, back to Godhead. It's like a platform for us, and why he has given us Vedas to understand our eternal relationship with Krishna. That's a vital relationship. Okay. And this is from purport. Maybe one of you, Rama Prabha Mataji, can you, or sorry, I think we have Prasad Prabhuji today. Prasad Prabhuji, will you be able to read this? Okay, maybe Rama Prabha Mataji.
Yes, Natasha. Both material nature and the living entity are eternal. That is to say that they existed before the creation. The material manifestation is from the energy of the Supreme Lord, and so also are the living entities. But the living entities are of the superior energy. Actually, the living entity is originally the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but due to his rebellious nature, he is conditioned within the material nature. In the scriptures, the Lord says that those attracted by this material nature are undergoing a hard struggle for existence. But we should know it with certainty from the description of these few verses that all transformations and influences of material nature by the three modes are also productions of material nature. All transformations and variety in respect to living entities are due to the body. As far as spirit is concerned, living entities are all the same. Bhagavad Gita 13.20 purport.
Thank you. So Prabhupada very beautifully explains here, that we are eternal. Actually, we are part and parcel of Krishna. We were that high quality. Just imagine it's like a first class level. And because of our enjoying tendency, that rebellious nature that I should also be asked for, I should also be the owner, that kind of enjoyment. We are, because of that rebellious nature, we have fallen down. Yeah. And, but all of this, material manifestation is also energy of Krishna. Living entity, we learned in 7th chapter that Krishna explains, I think it was verse 7.4, where he comes that he explains that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, ego, all these are, the elements, his energy. But then he explains that in the following verse that even there is also a superior energy, which is the living entity. So he calls us as a superior energy, right? We are his superior energy. And that's what Prabhupada is highlighting here again. Living entities are his superior energy, whereas all these gross elements, subtle elements are his inferior energy. So we are superior, yeah. So, but just because of our rebellious nature, we are falling down, yeah. With that, yeah, here it is, right? 7.5. Sorry. Yeah, so this talks about Purusha. The Supreme Lord is the Supreme Purusha, the master, controller, enjoyer, proprietor, and maintainer of this entire cosmos. The Jiva, which is the living entity, is the energy of Krishna. It is not the master or the controller. But still, Jiva is sometimes called Purusha due to his mentality of being the master. Thus, the word Purusha is used to refer to both Supreme Lord and the living entity. Okay, so that's why Purusha term is so and so. Yeah, and 21st verse talks about the material nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyment in this world. Very important verse, that nature is actually the cause of any body, form of body. All these 84 lakh species, whatever kind of body they get, we see that the adaptation of animal living in a cold region is different to the adaptation we have, right? Living here, right? I mean, living as human beings, right? Animals which are living in hot region, their body, their adaptation is different versus to the animal who are living in the temperate regions, right? So this nature, material nature, it is the cause of this body. We get senses, sense objects, everything from the material nature. The whole matter comes from material nature. When we see something very amazing, attractive, creature, it is, what is it coming out from? That attractive or that beautiful person, it is from this material nature. The material nature has given that body to the person, right? So we are getting attracted to that person, right? So, but at the end of the day, yes, everything is coming from material nature. But when we talk about living entities, why are we here? Krishna is saying that nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects. Yeah, any kind of body we get because it's from the material nature. Whereas he highlights living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyment in this world. We are the cause of our own sufferings. Why? What is the main component here? Because of our desire, because of our enjoying mentality. It's like we are correlating with this body so much that we want to enjoy, we want to desire more. Okay, like we give this example of a person watching a movie. See, when we all, when we used to watch a movie, or we watch a movie overall, yeah? When we watch a movie, at that time, whatever is happening in the screen in that movie, you can see the effect on us. If there is a sad scene going on, we cry. If there is a happy scene going on, we are cherished, right? So even though we are separate from the screen of the movie, or separate, from the movie itself, but whatever is going on in the movie, it's affecting us because we are observing that movie so closely and we are relating ourselves to it. And because we are relating ourselves to be part of that, or to be that, not part, but to be that, that's why we are undergoing that pain of crying, enjoyment, all of that. Similarly, when living beings see something, something like a sense object, right? The development of desire starts to enjoy that object. It might be as simple as seeing a phone on somebody's hand. The desire triggers. I wish I could enjoy it. I could have it, right? To enjoy. And then, and then similarly, we tend to suffer also in case we don't get what we are looking at. So why? Because we are relating ourselves. This pain, pleasure, everything is coming because we are relating ourselves to that. Similarly, we are relating ourselves with this body. We are identifying ourselves like this body, like we were relating ourselves to that movie screen, right? Because we are identifying ourselves with this body, that's why we are undergoing this suffering, because of our desires or because of our enjoying tendency. Yeah, we look at something, we start enjoying, But we don't realize that because we are relating, we might also undergo the pain, and we do undergo it. Right? Similarly, if you make a blind person sit in that movie, for example, will that person be affected? No, there will not be a much impact there because he is not able to relate himself to that screen, right? So the impact will be not there. Yeah, and that's how, because we relate ourselves to this mind body, it causes suffering. Yeah, so that's what is the gist of this verse basically. Yeah, and moving further, and just the last thing here, like we have mentioned, according to one's desires and activity, material nature places one in various residential quarters, means different kind of bodies. Yeah, the being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters, and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. Okay, it's our desires and our karma which is resulting us into that body, our enjoyment capacity. Yeah, so I hope it is clear that why are we the cause, the cause of various sufferings in enjoyment living entity. So the 22nd verse says about living entity in material nature thus follows the way of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. See, material nature is doing its job, right? But we are getting attracted to that, right? This verse is important for us to understand how living entities transmigrate from one body to another, right? We come under the influence of the modes of material nature. It's like changing of dress, right? Dehino asmami yatha dehi. Oh no, Vashamsi Jirnani was the shloka in second chapter. Vashamsi Jirnani yatha vihaya. That shloka clearly stated that we change this body like we change dresses. We get rid of one dress and then we go into another dress, right? So under the influence of material desire, the entity is born sometimes as a demigod, as a man sometimes as a beast, sometimes as a bird, an aquatic, a saintly man, or a bug. This is going on. We are moving from one body to another. Yeah. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstance. Yet he is under the influence of material nature. Actually, material nature is doing this, but we think we are the master. We have everything in our control. That's the issue again. Yeah? So, in the purport, Prabhupada is highlighting that how again hearing is very key. So maybe I'll let Reshma Mataji. Can you read this?
Yes, Mataji. One has to rise, therefore, above the three material modes and become situated in the transcendental position. That is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he becomes to enjoy spiritual happiness. Bhagavad Gita 13.22. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. So how can we transform ourselves? Hearing is the key process. It's the starting of the devotion, right? Shravanam Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. So it is the starting process for us. So it is very important that this hearing will, from the authoritative sources, Prabhupada highlights again, that it will make the transformation. Okay. Only when you have a transformation, you can, only when you hear from authorized sources, from the disciplic succession, you can see the transformation. you will see how it transforms, right? Okay. So yes, so now 23rd shloka. Here I'll go a bit quicker. I'm conscious of time. So Krishna says, yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, Bhokta, who is the Lord, Bharta, the supreme proprietor, Mahaishvara, who exists as overseer, Upadrashta, and permitter, Anumanta, and who is known as Supersoul. Okay, so Krishna is the only enjoyer, and we are to be, actually our status should be that we should have a clear understanding that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. In fact, he's the only enjoyer. We are to be enjoyed by the enjoyer. Okay, through our service and love, Krishna should enjoy. So we should be enjoyed by the enjoyer. But we try also to become the enjoyer. That's the problem, right? He's the overseer. It is mentioned here, right? The overseer means he's the guidance. You see, so many times we face that situation where our consciousness says, that we are tending to incline to do something, to take a decision, but our consciousness says this may not be right. But we have the habit of keeping that aside, not considering the guidance of our consciousness, and then we fail. Okay, so we tend to incline to do that because that kind of enjoying capacity is so high in us that we disregard. So he's constantly there with us as an overseer, providing guidance. Yeah. So what is the result of this knowledge? One who understands this philosophy concerning the material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of mode of material nature is sure to attain liberation. Krishna is saying he will not take birth here again, regardless of his position. And 14th chapter actually fully focuses on modes of material nature, and how they are acting on us, and we are actually, helpless. We think we are controller, but 14th chapter will make us realize that we actually don't have anything, So that's the main purpose of this Jnana section, last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. It is for us to understand that kind of knowledge which can make us aware and which can lead us to bhakti, because we will realize that it's only Krishna who is the controller. We are actually nothing. Yeah. To dovetail our desires, and desire is the main cause for everything, the trigger. You remember that triangle which we studied. Jiva desires. Based on the desire of Jiva, super soul grants, sanctions. And once the sanction is done by the super soul, material nature executes. Okay. So that triangle, all we do is desire. Okay. Now, right, the last but one shloka is, yes, Krishna highlights here that some perceive the super soul within themselves through meditation. We have learned this, dhyana, jnana, karma, and then bhakti, right? That's what again he's saying. Some perceive the super soul within themselves through meditation, others through cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruitive desires. Dhyana, jnana, right? And nishkam karma, right? Any path, all these paths, when these jnanis, we saw how they purposely try to, it's like they forcibly try to control their senses. Last time we discussed, right? In hot weather, purposely they'll keep themselves more so that their toleration, they can control their senses. But bhakti, bhaktas, what do? They do everything of that in offering to Krishna, dovetailing to Krishna, right? That's the difference. We don't deny that the senses. We don't deny the senses. We rather try to dovetail those senses through Krishna. Yeah. So any of these paths, dhyana, jnana, any path, they cannot attain the ultimate goal of Krishna without the component of devotion and love. They cannot. And then in the end, Krishna highlights that Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of Godhead. Yeah. Again, though this chapter is falling under Gyan Yoga, Krishna is imbibing the bhakti component again. He's again highlighting, by hearing, just by hearing, it leads us to bhakti, and bhakti is the key. Okay. So with that, we conclude today's session.